Welcome back, Cynthia Ruchti.
It's two individuals who have come together, and that unity is doing life together.
Your faith and pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today we welcome back Cynthia Ruchti. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Always good to talk to you, Jeanne.
Thank you. Well, I have to tell you all, this book, Song of Silence, it's very rare for a book to stop me in my tracks as many times as this book did, where I would stop and pray, stop and confess, stop and cry. This book touched my heart so deeply that I just hope that you guys will get it and read it, because it is really good. And the main character is not a young woman who's falling in love with another young man. This is a couple who've been married for a while.
And what does love look like for the long haul?
Mm-hmm.
That's a question that doesn't get asked very often. We, I think, kind of assume that after that first blush of newlywed has worn off, we just settle into a kind of a steady pattern through the rest of our lives. And then Lucy found out that it's not always like that, that sometimes there are bumps much later in life when you think there is nothing that can rock your world anymore. And that was Lucy's experience. It did. And she had to figure out what did that mean? What did love look like for the long haul?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that happens is her husband's retired, so he's home all the time. And then she ends up losing her job, her career that she had put her entire heart, her whole life into. She was carrying on her father's legacy with a music program at a local school, and suddenly it was gone, and she felt like a failure to her father. And then she's with her husband constantly while she's going through this extreme change in her life, depression. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little more.
Well, you've done a great job of talking about this story. His drive was to retire as early as he could and do nothing with the rest of his life, and her drive was such a consuming passion for her, and it was all positive, it would seem, on the surface. This drive to educate young people in music, and music was a part of all of her life. She communicated through sound. She communicated through music. And here they are then in this home where she loved her husband, there was no question about that, and he was a fine man, there was no question about that. But for the two of them to all of a sudden be in the same home all day, every day, after this job loss for her, it was a new kind of a challenge that she didn't expect and was completely unprepared for. Mm-hmm. You know, Jeanne, sometimes when we all applaud the idea when a young couple will go through extensive counseling in order to prepare for getting married. Mm-hmm. But we don't prepare couples for what retirement looks like, which is a different phase in marriage. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful book club in the book that helps her get through some of those issues. But
that was really a creative touch.
Thank you. When I talk to women's audiences about that kind of subject, and I happen to mention that idea, he's home all the time, most of the audience will go, oh, and lean back in their chairs. It's not an automatic that will be a smooth transition. Mm-hmm. I think it takes some very intentional reconnecting. Mm-hmm. It takes talking to one another about what is this going to look like, what is it going to look like for you, what will it look like for me, and what will it look like for us as a couple, our relationship. Mm-hmm. And then we throw a couple more complications in there, adult children moving home, and a few other things like that. Mm-hmm. But if I were to encapsulate it in a nutshell, a lot of the book has to do with identity, and where her passion and her identity had been linked so very clearly to her role as a music educator before. That's gone. Who is she now? Mm-hmm. And it takes her quite a while in the journey with little bits and pieces of benefit from a lot of different sources in order to discover where her true identity lay and how that was going to affect her ability to recapture the song that seemed to have been silenced in her life.
Yeah. And another problem that for the husband is he was trying so hard to cope with her depression and try and help cheer her up.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like everything he did was the wrong thing.
The
in her
opposite of what
eyes.
she needed, right, in her eyes, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think that happens so often in a marriage because when there isn't enough communication, there's that misunderstanding. But they have such a beautiful relationship.
They really do, and I think that's the thing that we have to lean back on as we're reading through the story. My husband has been retired for a while. He calls it semi-retired. He works a couple of days a week. He says as long as we're 50 miles away from where we live, I can tell stories on him. But his drive has been different. There are a lot of us who are married to the opposites of who we are. And that's a wonderful benefit because it gives us perspective from one side that may be completely different from our perspective, which makes a better whole than either one of us would have been on our own. So in this particular case, Bill was reading the story, the book, and he got 3 chapters in and said, "Hey, I'm Charlie." And I said, "Are you really, darling? Is that, well, I guess I do see some similarities between the two of you." And as we talked about it, I pointed out to him how kind Charlie was, that he was always looking for her best interests. He always had her best interests at heart. He was such a loving, giving, soft-spoken, sweet, industrious man. But he just didn't understand her or what she was going through. Her pain was something he couldn't relate to at all. And he said, "Yeah," and he was a little clueless. And I said, "Well, I didn't even notice that. I didn't even notice that as I was writing." But he's just so charming. And honestly, you probably discovered too in the book that there were places where his wisdom is what saved the day.
Yes.
That's another part of this. Sometimes we lose track of who we really are to one another, but in our marriage relationship, we kind of forget sometimes that it's not 2 individuals doing life together, but it's 2 individuals who have come together, and that unity is doing life together. It's easy to forget that as we go through.
Well, this book is a really good example, I believe, of how fiction can really impact a person's life. It can impact you by helping you to see yourself, flaws in yourself, understand a little bit more of God's love and how He can redeem the worst in us and help us to actually get better in whatever's the best in us. So thank you for writing this book.
It was my joy. When I was writing this particular story, during the editing phase, I had an experience like you had. I would edit a little, and I had to stop and pray. And I'd edit a little and stop and cry, and edit a little and stop and confess, because I saw myself in the times when maybe I wasn't acting by faith, or I wasn't acting in a way that was going to preserve our relationship. Could have been earlier that day even. So I appreciate your saying that, and my passion is equal to yours in that idea that story is such a powerful communicator. We often see ourselves much better there than we do in a book that we might not pick up because it looks like it's going to tell us what to do. And in fact, fiction really shows us who we are.
Yes, it does, when it's well written like yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You also got a couple Christmas books I'd like you to tell us about.
This past year,
Why don't you hold it up so people can see it?
In the Christmas season this past year, Worthy Publishing did this beautiful hardcover Christmas story of mine called An Endless Christmas, which is a story of a family that gets together. The whole big extended family gets together in this tiny little grandma and grandpa's cottage up in north of Stillwater, Minnesota, for the entire Christmas week. And they've got activities planned, and it's such a big, loving, wonderful family, the opposite of what the main character has experienced at Christmas time before. So she comes into that household because it's her boyfriend's family, and he wants them all to meet her and her to meet them. And he proposes 5 minutes into the story as soon as they get there, and she refuses him. But she's stuck there for the whole week. So their interactions and the concept of what truly makes an endless Christmas is part of what that story's theme is about.
Okay.
And then this year, this is just the advanced reader copy, so it'll turn out looking like this one in its hardcover with the beautiful texture to it and the raised letters. And this, in An Endless Christmas, that if you angle it just right, even the snowflakes sparkle. So this particular story, Restoring Christmas, is about an HGTV wannabe who would love to have her own segment on an upcoming pretend episode called Restoring Christmas. So she's tasked with filming the renovation of a fieldstone farmhouse in a particular area right on Lake Michigan in Wisconsin. And charming area. My brother lives in that town, so it's a beautiful setting. Her initial videographer that she chose for that project is unable to do that, so he sends his son, who's kind of a linebacker kind of guy, and just he has such a sense of humor. And the two of them have to work together on this project with a homeowner who has very little interest in what they're doing at all in restoring her home, and she wants things just so, and wants a very certain amount of things not changed at all, and no one knows why. That will be revealed later in the story. But it also begins to create that thought within each of us as we read about what it really means to have a restoring Christmas, what that really is like, and their adventures along the way. I often point to the idea that if anyone has seen Chip and Joanna Gaines in Fixer Upper, which is a show on television where they take things and remake what looked like the impossible and remake it into something beautiful, their personalities are much like the two characters in this story.
Okay. With Song of Silence, there's a thing about finding your passion. And I think it's so funny what you come up with for the husband's passion, but you don't have to mention it because I want people to get the book to find out what it is.
Okay.
I think that was so fun.
And it was an interesting kind of experiment of how was I going to handle that, and then I thought back to real life experience in my home when my husband had thought at one time that he wanted to raise tilapia in the heart of Wisconsin. In our backyard, and then there was another moment. Bless his heart, please know if you're watching this or listening to this, I found this charming. I didn't find it any other thing, but this was just so sweet and adorable of him that he said, look at how much a bottle of chives cost. We grow chives in our garden. They're just so prolific. I bet I could be a chive farmer. And I didn't know anyone at the time who was a chive farmer, so that struck me so funny. And I envisioned chives all over our yard and taking over the garden. And he would be dehydrating them in the basement and bottling them to send out. And I said, darling, that costs $1.29. That's not all that bad for all the work that was put into it. So I extrapolated a little bit. Most of the things that show up in our stories have some kind of a root in our real lives. Yeah. And that one happened to come from, he feeds me some material that I can use, and he's very proud of it when he can.
That's good. Well, there's a big emphasis on music in here. How is music part of your life?
I grew up in a family that was musical from day one. My mother had a beautiful alto voice, and my father was an instrumental band teacher for his entire career. He died very young. He died at 64, still teaching at the time, but he taught junior high children. So he took people who were not musicians and turned them into musicians. But in his way of looking at things and his approach was so much that the same thing that Lucy had in Song of Silence was this drive to show them that music wasn't just for music's sake alone. There was so much more to it. There was so much of forming our lives and forming our attitudes, and music appreciation as important as playing an instrument or singing. And so he was part of that foundation. All of us 5 kids in the family played at least 2 instruments and sang in church, and trips in the car were filled with song and 6 or 7 part harmony, sometimes 2, which is a little tough to do, but we we really learned our passion for music, all of us, early on in life. And then I also had some other music educators along the way. I had some worship pastors who were very strong in helping me to understand the link between music and worship. And then also I had an elementary vocal music teacher who had that same kind of a drive to help people understand what the music was doing and what the music was communicating, not just notes on the page or notes sung or notes that came out of an instrument. She had a very solid grasp of the concept of the meaning and the depth of music, as did my father as well. So I was surrounded by these people with strong gifts musically, strong gifts to educate musically, but who also filled me up with this drive to have music be a part of the rest of my life. I'm sure that's how you feel too. It is a part of your life. There's so much I communicate in my relationship with my Lord. And he communicates with me through music. There are others who find that through nature, and still others who find that in arts of another style. But for me, it's music, and I believe probably with you too, that's one of the ways that you really connect with God in a strong way. So that was very definitely kind of a background layer of why this book was important to me and how it resonated with me before it would ever resonate with readers. And I'm so grateful that it is resonating with readers. Some of them come at this story with because they've looked at the young couple that shows up in the story later on, that's where they identify, or the child.
I loved the family relationships in this book, where the children enter in, and it was, I was like, I'd like them together. They're sharing the same house because of necessity, and it's like their relationships are growing, and it was beautiful.
One of the things that struck me as I was writing that is how my adult children have helped me grow. And what I'm gaining from them, and how I'm now turning to seek their advice or their counsel on things in a good way, in a very healthy way, and wanted that to be part of this story too. As Lucy watched her adult children being adults, it was really having an impact on her and her healing and coming to rediscover her song.
Yeah, that was a really good part of the book. One of the things I want to ask you real quickly, how important are the arts in education of our children?
That's debated so many places and so many times. And I remember when my dad was just beginning to teach, which would have been back in the 60s, probably, early 60s. That was often a topic of discussion around the table, because it seems like music and the arts have oftentimes been relegated to this place of the unessentials in our education. There was just a ruling in, I can't remember the state now, but there was a ruling where they mandated that music and arts were part of the essential curriculum for education.
I think they are.
I think they are too, and there are a lot of us who understand that. There are some of the disciplines that we learn in the normal academic path that we take that we honestly will not use again. We need to learn them. I watch my grandchildren struggling with some of those issues, or my children when they were struggling with some of those issues, and I kind of shook my head thinking, yes, I know you need to learn this, but I haven't used that for 40 years or more maybe. But music not just informs us about the discipline of music, but it also informs us about the discipline of the soul and the discipline of our character. It informs us about cooperation and teamwork and the idea that, and especially my father was so good at this, at seeing the potential in some young person and knowing that if they could have success in music, that was going to inform their success in other arenas of life too. We continue to see that. It seems almost as if a non-issue, but it does keep coming up in discussion. We know that what we're learning through music is also related to math, and what we learn through music is also related to an appreciation and an understanding of history. It's all tied together.
It is.
So I applaud the places that are really investing in music education. And we pray for those that are debating whether it should go.
Yeah. Well, I feel too that all the arts help us to understand the creative character of our God.
Oh, so true.
So,
So
thank
true.
you so much for your creative work in the wonderful books that you write. You write both fiction and nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
The last book we interviewed you on was a nonfiction
Mm-hmm.
book. So thank you again for being our guest, and I hope people will look you up online. Where will they look to find you?
They can find me at cynthiaruchti.com.
Okay.
Ruchti is spelled Ruchti, or hemmedinhope.com, which is often an easy way to get to me because those are easier words to spell.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank
Cynthia.
you, Jeanne. Thank you.
Share